So without further ado, please meet my special co-host, Keith Simpson.
Well, thank you, Steve. Thank you for that. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. We are happy to have you and glad you could make it. So to begin, why don't you recount how we met?
Yes, well, I came over here to the United States from England in 1996, and I opened my first of 3 restaurants and a catering company. In 2006, I sold one of my restaurants, and I was watching what the broker was doing, and I thought, well, I could do that. So I joined another brokerage firm, which I actually ended up being fired from in 2012. And in 2000, I always remember that broker always telling me, wanted to get in the Bay Area, but there was this one guy called Steve Zimmerman. He's just wrapped up the whole of the Bay Area. So I thought, well, he's the guy I'm going to talk to and see if he wants to move out of the Bay Area and move into the area that I had been taken care of, which was more Sacramento, Lake Tahoe, and up to Redding. So I contacted you, Steve, and voila, here I am 9 years later. RRC, Restaurant Realty Company, historically worked in the Bay Area, and I enticed you to venture east and go into more of the Central Valley, Sacramento. And now in the company, there are 25 agents strong, covering all the counties, north and south. And from my beginnings working in the northern market, I now concentrate in LA. And I thank you, Steve, for that opportunity, because I'm really enjoying that. I have many contacts, though, in the past 16 years in the Northern California area. So I'm still very active and loyal to all those customers.
Thank you, Keith. It's been a pleasure having you. Keith, why don't you tell the audience about some of your unique restaurant deals? And after you finish, I'll tell them something about the unique deal I've done.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I thought of 3. And one was about 5 or 6 years ago in a town called Williams, which is up I-5, sort of on the way to Redding. And it was a business with real estate, and it'd be a well-renowned business up there, been in the same ownership for around 20 years. And it was for sale with the real estate for $700,000. And there were 3 plots of land. And this was going to be an SBA, which it did end up being. And on the 3 plots of land, 1.5 were taken up with the restaurant. The other 1.5 were taken up with parking lot. But near the end of closing the deal, we found out that on the corner, one of the plots used to be a Standard Oil. And there was a concern that if there could be a seepage of oil, then you could be liable and in trouble. So what happened is that the SBA there was enough inventory with the real estate and the business that they took that plot of land out of the deal. And to this day, the buyer pays $1 a year to lease that plot of land from the seller. And that was a first for me. Another one was a bakery called Eddie's Bakery, but it started off, this is in Fresno, and La Boulangerie Bakery. This is about 3 years ago. I just sold that for 1.2 million. And like a lot of my deals, I have an A buyer that buys it, but if anything goes wrong, I have a B and C. And the B of La Boulangerie, I said to him, look, I might have another bakery coming up. And what happened was the owner of Eddie's Bakery found out that I'd sold Boulangerie, and he said, whoever sold Boulangerie, I want him selling my place. So I immediately contacted the buyer B from the previous deal. And sure enough, 4 months later, we closed escrow. And that was a $3.9 million deal with real estate and with the SBA. And to date, that's actually my largest deal. And then just recently in Monterey, it started about 2 years ago in 20. I met the owner, Pat Totah, and he owned a restaurant in San Jose called La La Grill. I didn't know he owned any other restaurants. I was just meeting him with that. And we sold that quite quickly, and it turned into something now quite different. But his wife wanted him to get out of the restaurant business. He owned 4 restaurants in Monterey, Salinas. And so he was coming over to Phoenix, where I live. And he has a daughter at ASU. So the 4 of us with our wives, we met, and his wife just said, I want to get out of this business. I want to get out. It's time. My husband, after 30 years, he needs to retire. So I flew over to Monterey. I met with him. He drove me around all the restaurants. We had lunch at one of them. And sure enough, I actually sold them all. And the last two just 2 weeks ago, Lala Grill and Lala Oceanside. And these were $2.7 million business only deals, again with SBA. But the story on that one is that the buyer of Lala Grill Oceanside wanted to buy another restaurant in Salinas, one of Patrick Totah's other restaurants. But the landlord didn't want the buyer. He wanted his brother to buy the restaurant because his brother owned 10 other restaurants and he wanted him to have that one. So that did happen. So we sold that restaurant to the brother of the landlord, and we had to move the buyer of a $1.2 million deal and persuade him to spend $2.7 million and buy 2 restaurants instead, which he did. So altogether, Patrick Totah, about $5 million worth of deals in the last 2 years with this one restaurateur.
Well, that's not too shabby. I'm
No.
sure wife appreciated that.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I don't quite have as many of stories quite that entertaining, although I do have a lot of stories, but I'm going to talk about one in particular that actually involved the largest restaurant in Northern California. It had a total of 19,000 square feet, 600 seats, and was owned by the same family for almost 75 years over a course of 3 generations. I dealt with 6 family members, all who were related in this transaction, including fathers, sons, uncles, and cousins. One member of this group had been in litigation, basically suing the other 5 family members for over 20 years for differences on how the restaurant was being run. And this deal went over a course of about 1.5 years, and we were within about 30 days of closing escrow, and I was notified that there is a trial date that's set between the sellers to basically, deal with this continued legal action based on this one, family member. And so 30 days after the projected close of escrow, there was going to be this trial. So due to the pending litigation, the sellers were told that, all their money, and we're talking about millions of dollars, would have to stay in escrow until the litigation was completed and settled. And sure enough, after 20 years of litigation, the complaining party settled 20 years of grievances in one day, immediately after the close of escrow. It's amazing what money does to change people's thinking. And that was quite an experience, to say the least. Keith, you have met some very interesting people during your restaurant career, as I have. And could you tell the audience something about some of the most interesting people you've dealt with over the years, please?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely, Steve. Well, from 1985 to 1996, before I arrived in the United States, in England, I was catering for many large events, air shows, Natural History Museum, and I had the honor of catering large banquets actually for the royal family. And how that works, it's not at Buckingham Palace. They have their own catering at Buckingham Palace. But there are in England what you call livery companies. They are associations of, you could be a carpenter, an ironmonger, a fishmonger, and they have these associations. And there are 110 of those livery companies, of which 39 of them have trade halls. Now, when I say halls, it's not like your local conference hall or modern like a hotel conference room. These are, for instance, Fishmongers Hall, built in 1435. The Armorers and Braziers we used to work at was built in 1346. Carpenters, 1429. And again, it was rebuilt in 1876 following the Great Fire of London. And then in 1956, it was built again because of the air raids in the war, the Second World War, that bombed a lot of London. And it's in these major halls, especially the fishmongers, because it was quite amazing. It was so prestigious. It would seat around 400 people. And you've got to imagine a hall which the ceiling is gold leaf and beautiful patterns. It looked a little bit like Buckingham Palace, but the carpet pattern matched the ceiling. So everything you saw above, you saw below. And this is where I catered a lot for the royal family, because the royal family are also patrons of large charities. Now, I don't think in the US you have patrons of charities in that way, but the royal family, if they have their name as a patron to a charity, that's going to attract a lot of donors. And when you have a dinner and you're trying to raise money, that's what it's been like a political party having a political dinner. if Princess Diana or the Queen is the patron of that, and she's invited, obviously, and she can make it, and she is there, well, then it's a very much a white glove affair. And the interesting part about catering for these people is they're on a time clock. So if they were coming for a dinner and or a lunch, let's say, and they were arriving at 12:45, they arrived for drinks, and at 1:10, everyone is going to be seated by 10:15, what was I saying? 1 o'clock, they had to be seated. By 1:15, we're starting to serve. But if the royal member had to be gone by 2:15, it didn't matter what the guest was eating. As soon as Princess Diana had finished her entree, we all trooped in, every plate was taken. So you could be sort of having your Brussels sprout, and the plate's gone. That's how it was, and everything was done to a clock. Very much, food served from the left and wine served from the right. And you never talked to a guest. Unless you were spoken to, you never spoke to anybody. You just poured wine. If they didn't want it, they'd tell you. And that's just how it works. So a lot of that, I learned a lot of the etiquette of banqueting in those royal events. On the other side of the scale, I met Robert Plant of Led Zeppelin fame back in Lake Tahoe in 2008. He was singing with Alison Krauss. If you remember, he won, 7 or 8 Grammys for their album. And he was playing in Tahoe with Alison Krauss. And a customer at my restaurant up there, Murphy's Irish Pub that I had, the customer's dad had written 4 of the songs that they were going to sing that night. And so he asked me if I wanted to come and join him. He had a spare ticket. Would I? Yes, please. So in I go. And little did I know that he also had backstage passes. So after the show, we all trooped backstage, and I'm going, what am I going to say to these guys? I don't know Alison Krauss, Led Zeppelin, I haven't seen since 1971. And that was at the Marquee Club, which is used to be about 300 people. They can fill 100,000 auditorium, but this was 300 people when I saw them in 71. What am I going to say to Robert Plant? So they're coming down, and Robert Plant's walking down the corridor. He's got a glass of red wine in his left hand, and he's got the bottle in his right hand. That's how he walked towards us. And I'm the last one. I mean, they go and they thank the dad, they thank the son and the dad's songs, and got to me. So I looked at Robert and I said, "You've come a long way since 1971 at the Marquee Club." And he goes, you were there. He said, wow, Jimmy's wife was having a baby. It was pandemonium. And that was just amazing. And then we were talking for probably 20 minutes, just he and I. I wanted him to come back to the restaurant. It'd be great. You imagine 10 o'clock at night and Robert Plant comes in, but they've got these big trailers and they are off to Vegas the next day. They had to go from Tahoe down to Vegas. But anyway, it was just fun. What's another one? Oh, yes, marketing calls. Don't we all get so many of these marketing calls? And you just say, yeah, and you just put the phone down. Well, I got this call. This was back in 2013, and it was someone, is it so-and-so from, I can't even remember the agency. And then we're looking for talent for the Food Network. Ooh, that pricked up my ears, just the name of the Food Network. Well, apparently they were interviewing 80 brokers, and they were producing a new show. They hadn't even named the show yet. They didn't know what it was going to be called. And so they wanted a video of me in front of a screen and talking, and they would just ask me questions. So I had my phone on the floor so I could hear them. My daughter had her phone propped up on boxes and books, looking at me like a static camera, and they would ask me questions, and I would just do my thing. Well, anyway, it got down, each week they'd call me, well, you're in the top 30, and then you're in the top 12. And then by the time it got to the final 3, I'm in the top 3. I looked at my wife, Jessica, and I said, oh my God, this could be real. Well, I was chosen, and I had to keep it a secret for 4 weeks while the Food Network marketing machine got going. They still hadn't named it, and I'm dealing with then a talent lawyer called Laura Drossman in LA, because there are many pitfalls. I didn't know what I was signing. They wanted me to sign this sort of 20-page document, and I just wanted to make sure it didn't say that all my money was going to go to Steve Zimmerman. I wanted to make sure I was going to get paid for this, So anyway, she did a great job for me, and I was dealing with Magnetic Media. They were out of Minneapolis, talking with Andrew Schrechter, who was the main director of marketing for the Food Network. It was quite a thing. And then in the late 2013 and 14, they buzzed me all over the nation. I went to Fort Lauderdale, Indianapolis, Austin, Texas, San Francisco. There were 8 episodes that they actually filmed. So while they were filming, it took us, they flew me out on a Monday, flew me back on a Friday, and Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we were working 12-hour days. As soon as the sun was up, the camera was on. And the one camera on me, one camera on the two buyers. And it ended up being called Buy This Restaurant. It was like a HGTV, buying a house. But instead of just saying, here's the kitchen, here's the bathroom, I would be advising those buyers based on their experience. If you've never owned a restaurant before, the last thing you want is a Ruth Chris steakhouse. Then financially sound. And I was showing them 3 restaurants, and that's what we did. And they took about 45 hours of actual film during this show, and they had to bring it down to 25 minutes, which is what the show was without ads. So that was fun. And I've had people since then call our office saying, I want that guy, sell my restaurant, I want that guy. So there you go. It was fun.
Yeah, if you want to get a real kick, go to Amazon and look for Buy This Restaurant, Keith Simpson, and you'll get a big kick watching it. It's really, my wife and I have seen it many times. And every time we see it, we see something different that really gets us excited. So, anyway, congratulations to you on that situation. I've had the opportunity. I've been selling restaurants for 26 years, and during that time frame, I've had the opportunity to meet some fairly well-known folks over the years, and actually do deals with some very notable people. And I just thought I would mention some of those people because they are fairly well known. The first one is Noah Alper, who was the founder of Noah's Bagels. After Noah sold Noah's for over $100 million, he decided to open, because he lives in Berkeley, a kosher vegetarian restaurant in Berkeley on Center Street. And it wasn't meeting his expectations. And so consequently, I had the opportunity to sell that restaurant and get to know Noah, who's a lovely guy. Another gentleman who's very well known, his name is Guy Fieri. He's one of the leading stars on the Food Network, Diners, Dives. I'm sure you've seen the show. He's all over the place. And I sold he was a partner with another gentleman that they met together in LA before they started a chain called Johnny Garlic's, which is sort of a leisure, middle market leisure restaurant, which was fairly successful. I sold, when Guy before he went to the Food Network, I sold their restaurant, Johnny Garlic's in Petaluma. And then subsequently, I sold 3 other Johnny Garlic's restaurants for his partner. And needless to say, he's a pretty colorful guy. Dwight Clark, a name that probably most of you know, he was formerly with the San Francisco 49ers. He was a receiver. In fact, he caught the winning pass at past Super Bowl game. And I sold Clark's by the Bay, which is obviously named after Dwight in Redwood City. That was one of the earlier deals I did. I actually ended up selling that restaurant, I think 2 or 3 times after that. Another lady that I had the pleasure of working with, her name is Justine Miner. You probably don't know her name, and you probably may not even know the name of her father, Robert Miner. Anyway, Robert Miner originally co-founded Oracle Corporation with Larry Ellison. He was the first, partner with Larry. And unfortunately, he died at a fairly young age. And the restaurant that we sold was called R&M, named after Robert and his daughter. Justine operated that restaurant. She was a chef. Then I had the opportunity to basically sell a restaurant to Kevin Youkilis. He's an all-star for the Boston Red Sox, and I sold Los Gatos Brewing to him in Los Gatos. Michael Schwab, the son of Charles Schwab, who's the founder of Charles Schwab Financial Services Corporation. I sold a restaurant that Michael owned called Charlie's, which he named after his father in San Francisco a number of years ago. A gentleman that I worked with who's quite a kick, his name is Bill Foss, F-O-S-S. You may not know his name. However, he was the co-founder of Netscape, which was one of the first major internet marketing companies. And he sold that like 20 some odd years ago. He had originally called me, he opened a restaurant called Fish in Sausalito, which is a sustainable, real high-end fish operation, to do a valuation like 20 some odd years ago to buy out his partner. I got to know him. So bottom line, I ended up selling him a restaurant called Kenwood Restaurant. and vineyards, including the building in Kenwood. And I'll never forget the time when he was doing his due diligence. He says, "Steve, we got to check the septic line and make sure there's no leaks in it." So I had to accompany Bill through the fields, through the leach fields, to look at the line to make sure, the septic, is if I would know if the septic line was okay or not. But he was just a real trip and an enjoyable guy to work with. Another name that's fairly well known internationally, his name is Sam Brofman, and he's a family member of the Seagram's Corporation, which is owned by the Brofman family, which is actually the largest distillery of alcoholic beverages in the world. Got to sell him a restaurant in Oakland. But irrespective of these big, well-known names, every buyer and seller that I have dealt with throughout the years has been a unique experience and one of the major motivating factors for contributing to why I really love being in this business, because everybody's got their own unique sense of personality. So today we have chosen for the topic of today's show, the things you need to know before you get involved in the restaurant business. And before I delve into it, I thought I would let our esteemed guest, Keith, give his 2 cents on the subject. Obviously, it's a very involved subject. We're certainly not going to be able to cover every aspect of it, during this show, and we will have our, the next show in February, and perhaps we'll talk a little bit further on the items regarding this that we won't have time to cover today. So, Keith, please.
Thank you, Steve. Yes, why do you want to buy a restaurant and how to get into the restaurant business? Well, one of the reasons not to get into the restaurant business is, well, my wife cooks really well. We want to buy a restaurant together. That's not a good reason to buy a restaurant just because one of you can cook well. Something I do hear frequently. So location. There's two differences. Are you going to set up, like Steve was mentioning, a vegetarian restaurant and it's now a burger restaurant, or is it a shell site? So what are you going to look at? If you look at an empty space, let's say a 1,500, 2,000 square foot empty space, you're probably going to spend 150, 200,000 just on permits, especially if you're in LA or San Francisco, just to get the plumbing and the electrical and the health and all the other permits that you need to operate a restaurant. If you buy an existing establishment, everything's covered. You've got everything. You've got the kitchen. You've got the space you need. Okay, if it's an asset sale and they're not making money and you can buy it for a relatively low price, and I'm saying about 100, 125,000, you're buying everything complete. All you really have to do is slap a coat of paint on the walls and change the name out the front door, and you can do whatever you want. And that is a much less costly way of opening your own restaurant. But then it's location. It's probably the sort of standard. You've got to do your homework. It's no good opening a burger place and there's a In-N-Out just around the corner, because I think In-N-Out's going to beat you. So you've got to look at the concepts that are around you already. And if you're looking at a strip mall where there's a restaurant going out of business, or there's a shell site, you're only allowed to do certain concepts because the people that are already there are going to have a non-compete. So you can't have two burger restaurants, other types of restaurant in that same area. Then you've got to have operational experience. If you don't have operational experience and you want to open your first restaurant, go and work in the industry for 6 months. Doesn't matter, wash up, host, bar back, busser, whatever. And right now, the restaurant industry is crying out for labor. So you can get a job anywhere, and not only you're learning, you're going to get paid for it as well, and quite handsomely these days. So go and see if you want to do that business, because if you're in a kitchen, you're washing up, you can see all this going on. And then let me tell you, it is organized chaos in a kitchen. If you haven't been in an industrial kitchen, you're watching service at 7 o'clock at night. It's amazing to see all these people flying around, half a dozen chefs, and they all gets to the plate timely, all in 10, 15 minutes. It's quite incredible. So you need to see that. You need to be, as an employer, you've got to be a good man manager. You've got to be able to manage people. It's not just, I like to be, and that's the other one I get, as well as my wife cooks, is I love people. That's not a reason for getting in the restaurant business. You can work in an office and with other people and still like people. So you've got to be a good man manager of people in the sense of your own employees, and you're taking a big risk. You've got to have the knowledge of the front of house and the back of house. It's good to do every job and lead by example as well. And remember, you're the last to get a paycheck. It's not like you're going to get a paycheck every 2 weeks, a month. You are going to be the last person to receive anything. And I just got a couple of little stories that I remember back in 77, how the kitchens are so different. I probably couldn't work in those kitchens these days, but back in 1977, soon after leaving catering college, I worked in this big restaurant called Langan's Brasserie in London, right in Piccadilly. 22 chefs in the kitchen, 400-seat restaurant on 2 floors. So the kitchen was in the basement. The first floor was the 200-seater and another 200 upstairs. And from the kitchen, there was actually an escalator. So they would the buses would carry all the food up an escalator to the first and then upstairs to the second floor. And as the new chef on the first day, they would tie a 56-pound weight and a chain around your ankle. You had to work an 8, 9, 10-hour shift, dragging that thing along. And if you were on the vegetable section and you had to bring food, it's probably a 25, 30-foot walk to bring the food up to the front for the chef to okay everything before it goes to the waiters. You had to drag that ball and chain. And then at the end of the night, the chefs would pick you up and they would throw you into the dirty pot wash sink, which is probably 5 foot by 3 foot by 4 foot deep of filthy water. That's your initiation. I don't think they do that these days. And one little trick I learned years ago, I remember as a chef, I ordered 6 prime ribs. I wanted them off the bone, but I wanted the bones. I wanted to roast the bones. I wanted to make stock, make sauces with the bones, but I wanted them removed, which was in those days a free service. But when you get the bone, when I got the meat and I put the bones in the area where the meat would be, there were 4 bones left over. And you're buying the joints by weight. So they just weighted my delivery with extra bones. Okay, I got the bones, but I'm paying $8.99, $10.99 a pound for prime meat for extra bones. That's how they get you. We used to have huge scales. We were weighing everything and checking. And it's amazing how vendors will try and rip you off as well. So it's important that before you jump in and own your own business, you've got to work it, see it, learn from other people's mistakes, and hopefully you won't make too many yourself. So that's my 6 cents worth.
All right, well, thank you. Just so you understand my perspective, as far as the restaurant business is concerned, I started in the business at 15 in the family business. I started washing dishes. Actually, before that, when I was about 7 or 8 years old, my father would bring me in the restaurants on a weekend and have me make sodas, make milkshakes, grind meat, double grind meat. We used to take whole chucks and trim them and grind them. And I would double grind them when I was 7, 8 years old, make patties. And so I got a flavor for the business, when I was very young. And then when I was 13, I was in Boy Scouts and I said, Dad, I want to go to this jamboree. It's like an international camping trip. And they have them every 4 years in different parts of the country. This was going to be in Colorado. And he said to me, well, it costs a couple $100. It'd be a good idea if you paid for that yourself. So I looked at him, I said, well, geez, where am I going to get, a couple $100? He says, well, your cousin has a gas station. Why don't you see if, you can maybe work on Saturdays and maybe part-time during the summers and school vacation, whatever, and make some money. So sure enough, that's what I did for 2 years. I started cleaning the lube room in a gas station, pumping gas. It was greasy, and his whole ploy was so that when I turned 15, I could work in the restaurant. So even if I was washing dishes and cleaning toilets, that would be a much more of an upgrade than working in a gas station. And so I went from axle grease to kitchen grease. I got to peel onions and I got to clean toilets and I got to wash dishes. But that was an upgrade because I had a roof over my head. I was inside. I got to interact with employees and customers. And I could eat whatever I wanted to eat, which was wonderful. So through my high school years, I cooked on Saturdays and during summer vacations, and so I learned the business from the bottom up. And after college and the service, I started as a manager trainee and opened restaurants, and eventually ran the company. So the point is, and as Keith has mentioned, to really understand this business, you have to really understand the operational aspects of the business. And when you're an owner operator and you have, you're running one store by yourself, especially you need to know all the crafts. I mean, you should know how to cook. You should know how to wait on tables. You should know how to bust dishes and make the drinks at the bar. So that if somebody doesn't show up, and nowadays people can't even find enough staff to staff their basic schedule because of the COVID and the high unemployment rate, et cetera. And so you need to jump in and do what you need to do. Our local Japanese restaurant that we go to regularly, my wife and our grandchildren, I saw the owner waiting tables, and I talked to her. I said, "Geez, you've owned this restaurant a long time." Yes, 35 years, and I had to close for lunch. I don't have enough people to staff the place, and she's working as a waitress, and so it's very important that you understand all the operational aspects of the business without a doubt. You have to be good at dealing with people. We deal with all kinds of people, and it's important that you like people. And even if some people you don't like, you still have to appear that you like them and work with them. And you can't really have biases towards people. And if you do, you got to keep those to yourself. You got to be objective. You got to be a good communicator. And you got to treat people fairly and honestly. And it's always objective. It's always important to be objective. Because you're a role model, and employees look to the owner as the one who sets the pace for the business. You should always have a smile on your face, put your best foot forward. I mean, everybody doesn't have a best day. Obviously, everybody's got a bad day, but you got to be positive. You got to put up a facade if necessary. And again, you're the role model. You set the pace for the restaurant. You need to maintain high standards so that there's going to be consistently good service, good food, and in a clean and safe environment. So people skills are extremely important, and having operational experience is a must. Unless you're going to be doing a franchise deal, and we'll talk about that if we have time later. Whereas a lot of franchisors generally, they just like someone with no experience at all, no bad habits, and they can basically train them in their franchise model, method. But in any event, you need to have good financial wherewithal. You must be able to understand how to read a profit and loss statement, daily sales reports, monthly bank statements. You must understand the proper targeted expense categories. So you should know what your food cost percentage should be, what your pouring costs should be, what your occupancy costs should be, utility costs, et cetera. You need to have a good working knowledge of what are the target cost categories that I need to achieve in order to obtain a reasonable net profit. Inventory control is very important. It's also important that you don't run out of products unless you have a special of the day where you only make X number, and once you sell those specials, you're done. But other than that, you should have products on online all the time to maintain being able to service your product mix properly. Inventory control is extremely important. You need to know cash handling procedures, portion control, receiving and security procedures for storing merchandise, scheduling and monitoring employees, hours, and you should have standard operative procedures for all functions of the restaurant. In other words, printed out procedures for handling cash, for hostessing, for the hostess position, the waitress, food server position. You should have pictures of all the finished plate pictures with the different portions, et cetera, all spelled out. So there's no gray areas. People have a Bible to refer to, on maintaining consistency and proper execution. So having good financial wherewithal is important. You should have legal and accounting support. You should ideally work with an attorney and or accountant that understands the restaurant business and understands all the nuances of restaurant accounting, et cetera. It's especially important that you follow the law, that you make sure everyone meets the immigration requirements for being hired, because there are strict penalties like $10,000 or more for someone that is not a legal person. You need to have the proper licenses in place and do the proper renewals, with your business license, your health department license, alcohol beverage control license, paying the yearly fees, making sure, all the fire equipment is regularly inspected and updated. And obviously you need to file your tax returns, the payroll tax, state, federal taxes. So it's important that you operationally are well adept, that you get the proper legal and accounting input. So in addition to these general topics, and as I said, we could spend, hours and hours going through all the things that you need to consider before you go in the restaurant business. But, there are obviously some major issues that we haven't even, had a chance to go through, but, such things as finding the proper location. As Keith mentioned, when you find a location, you want to make sure it's a location that's fairly well built out and you're not vulnerable to have a lot of new head-on competition come in. Because to build out a restaurant costs, hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially. And you want to make sure that, you're not going to be, basically your business is not going to be intruded upon by, head-on competitors. So you have to make sure that, the location is right as far as the demographics to meet your price, the prices that you're going to be charging. You want to make sure you're in a location where there's availability of employees. I mean, today the employee situation is very difficult, but there are some various parts, even pre-COVID, of areas that have a shortage of employees all the time. So you want to make sure you have enough employees to staff your restaurant. So, and you need to know how much money you need to operate. When we sell an existing restaurant, let's say the restaurant sales price is $150,000. If you really analyze all the other pieces of, the investments that you're going to need to put in, you're going to find that $150,000 could be $300,000. For example, you need deposits to give the landlord. There's going to be closing costs for closing the restaurant. You have to pay inventory costs. And I'm giving you the example of an existing restaurant where you're buying a going concern, a business that's already making money, and you're just going to continue to perpetuate that same concept. So I'm not talking about remodeling costs. I'm not talking if you're doing, going to basically change the concept or having to pay training costs if you're going to have to hire new employees. I'm just talking about the basic things you need to do if you are buying an existing going concern and you're going to continue to run it the same thing. And most importantly, which a lot of, unfortunately, buyers neglect, is you need working capital, because unfortunately, things don't always happen as you project. Even if you use conservative projections, things like COVID, an earthquake, the Great Recession, all kinds of acts of God that you just can't anticipate may happen. So you need to have a reserve of capital to deal with shortfalls for paying the bills. And so what we generally recommend is you should have at least minimally 6 months of working capital in order to, be properly funded to deal with these unanticipated events. So again, this is just some highlights of different things that you really need to consider before you, get into this business. And there's just a lot of moving parts. So, Keith, did you want to add anything else in regards to
well,
this?
there's one thing you sort of touched on franchise, which is quite different, because you can go into a franchise not knowing anything about the restaurant business other than you like the franchise. You want to get in there. It's a safe bet. It's what I call putting your toe into the restaurant, into the water, into the restaurant business, not diving in, because you're going to get a full training. You'll get ease with SBA bank lending because of the training you're getting. The bank then know that you will know your subject. They know the marketing is done by the major corporation. But it was quite amusing. A few years ago, I was selling a couple of, I won't name the brand of franchise, but it was a couple of sandwich franchises, quite local in the Sacramento area. And the franchise sent me this sort of 6-page questionnaire that had to be completed by the prospective franchisee. And I've got 48 years of restaurant experience, and I'm looking through this, and I got to page 3, And I'm going, I don't know the answer to this question. I don't know the answer to these questions. And so I called the lady up. I said, this is stuff that you're asking somebody who's had years and years of experience. And yet this person is inexperienced. How do you expect them to answer? And I then said, you know what? It's only a bleep sandwich. It's only a sandwich. It's not a fine dining restaurant. And she just laughed because the bleep wasn't a bleep. But anyway, they will give you a month's training, but you may have to fly to Atlanta or somewhere, and you've got to pay for that and your hotel, and you get trained, and the franchise is all yours. Not my cup of tea, but that's just not the way I was trained. And I feel, you know, if it's good enough to be a franchise, I can do it myself.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. I want to sort of go to some of the questions that we have been put forward. The first is, what percentage of the total business is takeaway delivery business these days during COVID era? What does the future hold for dine-in part of the business? You want to take a stab at that, or Keith?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you own a restaurant and you're not doing 25 to 50% of your business is not to go, in some way take away, whether it's Uber Eats or all the others, Postmates, then your competitors are just going to beat you because you're hunting down sales right now. There's a lot of nervousness of coming to a restaurant, even if you've got a patio. The customers, there's a lot of people staying at home. They want their food delivered. Personally, it's not the greatest quality when you get it delivered because food in a cardboard box for 25 minutes is not the same as on a plate straight out of a restaurant. But I'm selling a place actually right now, which is a deli, and their to go has gone from 20% in 19. It's now 60% of their business. Now their business has increased maybe 10% in total, but 60% of it is now coming from to go. So.
Yeah, I concur with Keith's comments. I think people planning for the future are going to be more cognizant for a dine-in restaurant to have ample outdoor space and a dining room that can be well spaced, you know, in conjunction with a lot of outdoor space and a menu that is conducive to some extent to takeout and delivery. The models that I'm seeing most successful are those today. The restaurants that have been most successful during COVID have been those that were sort of already modeled to do 50-60% takeout delivery, you know, prior to COVID. You know, people are yearning to get back into the restaurants. You know, they're tired of their own cooking. They want more variety. And as we all know, eating out in a restaurant is more than just satisfying our stomachs. It's an entertainment experience as well. So I'm very bullish that the restaurant industry is going to survive and it will prosper in the years to come. Next question.
Steve, I tell you, if there are people listening,
please.
If there are people listening that are thinking about buying a restaurant, I did hear over the weekend in the news that the CEO of Pfizer, so you think of how much money they've made in the last 2 years, he believes the pandemic will be over by spring this year. Amen. So in 3 months' time is his anticipation that the pandemic, whether there'll be an endemic, but the pandemic will be over in 3 months.
Well, from your mouth, God's ears. For sure.
Yeah.
Next question. What is considered as the average net income for a good Indian restaurant in the Bay Area scene? You have any thoughts on that at all?
Well, I don't see an Indian restaurant being any different to any other concept. You know, at the end of the day, restaurants that might have a low food cost might have higher other costs. In San Francisco, in the Bay Area, you're going to have high rent costs. So if you've got a high labor, a high rent, and a high cost of goods, then you're probably not likely to make a lot of money. So you've got to have a balance where prime costs are no more than 60%, which is your labor, your cost of goods, and your rent, all within 60 to 65% max. All your other costs will add up to about 25%. And if you're lucky, you're left with 10 to 15. And I don't think it matters whether it's Indian or not. And Indian, I love Indian food. So let me tell you, because another question, I just said, what's your favorite restaurant? Well, if I could find a good Indian restaurant in America, because they're all over London. Yeah, I would always say in the restaurant industry, if you're making 10 to 15% of your sales as profit, bottom line, seller's discretionary earnings, you're doing good.
Yes. Okay. And just to add a little to that, one of the big factors that gets out of control, especially in very high rent areas like the San Francisco Bay Area, Silicon Valley, LA, San Diego, many parts of the state, rents can go way out of line. And so as a thumb rule, occupancy costs, when we say occupancy costs, we're talking about base rent and any of the other ancillary costs. If you're in a shopping center, an office, and you have, triple net rent, real estate taxes, fire insurance, and CAM costs, common area maintenance costs, they should not exceed 10% total, all inclusive max, in order to generate a reasonable bottom line. And unfortunately, so many deals that we see are running, occupancy costs in the area of, 13, 15, up to 20%, which there's no way in heck you're going to be able to generate any kind of a profit. In fact, you're going to end up, generating a large loss. So it's imperative that your occupancy costs, all included, any ancillary costs, should not be more than 8 to 10% of sales. Okay, another question. Has the pandemic pushed more percentage rent to account for potential government limitations to capacity? So I think what's the person that asked this question, I know him, and he's a very astute real estate broker. And so I think what he's asking is, are landlords becoming more flexible, and rather than have, any kind of stringent base rent requirement, are they looking at just a percentage rent situation only until such time as this pandemic is behind us, and it appears to be, permanently behind us. I'm seeing in some cases, I've seen percentage rent only, but it's with the footnote that, only through the COVID period, so to speak, then the rent would basically go to, the market rent scenario. So some cases we're seeing that, landlords are over the place on how they're handling rent during COVID. Some have given free rent, some have deferred rent, some have abated rent. But by and large, if they defer rent, usually they want that rent to be paid back. It's just not, most landlords are just not saying, we're forgiving rent totally. So it's really, you're at the mercy of, how reasonable of a landlord you have. And there's varying degrees of them. So it's been a very iffy situation. I know myself, I'm a restaurant landlord, and we ended up actually giving the our tenant, some substantial reduction for a few months per his request. So, it's a case by case basis. Here's another question. What is the number factor that prevents a restaurant deal from closing successfully? What is the number factor that prevents a restaurant deal from? I'm not sure. How do you interpret that question?
I read it and I'm not sure. I mean, a number factor. What are you saying? A $500,000 restaurant, and would the seller carry 450 of it? That's a number factor. But I don't think that would work. Yeah. So I don't.
Well, we can get back to Alexander and ask him that question. Okay. I'll send him an email. This is another next question is, do you expect inflation to create more restaurant closures? That's a very good question.
I don't. Personally, I just think there is so much pent up demand, whether you have food delivered or whether you go to restaurants, that if an entree, a year and a half ago was $25 and it's now $32, that's just the cost of going out to eat. I think there's plenty of people that will go on eating. So I don't think inflation, it's not just inflation of cost of goods, it's inflation in attracting labor. So there's many factors. So I don't think it's going to close more restaurants because of inflation, because like any other industry, and we just saw it, I think in the grocer industry yesterday, Procter & Gamble are putting up all their prices 8%. toothpaste, toilet rolls, everything's going to 8%. It is what it is. And people are just going to pay. I don't think it makes a difference.
Right. I concur. His last question is, what are your favorite trends in the restaurant industry? Favorite trends? Any thoughts on that?
No, I'm going to fire that one back at you.
Okay. Well, obviously, I think, people are favorite trends in the restaurant industry. I don't know if that's from the perspective of a buyer of a restaurant or just the customer trend. I mean, from a buyer's perspective, obviously, they want to see a restaurant, as we mentioned earlier, that's got a good base of takeout and delivery, has outdoor seating, ideally has a drive-through. Drive-throughs have really, creamed, basically done extremely well during this time frame. So anyway, that's a little general. Here's another question from Christopher. What is the most unique offer that someone has put forth to buy a restaurant bar? Unique offer that someone has put forth. Keith, you want to?
Well, I would say every deal is unique because some people who are buying let's say a $300,000 restaurant, they have $300,000. That's not unique. They're just buying it, cash. Other people are saying, well, I've got 150. Would the seller carry 150 and be the bank? Other times it would be, I would go to my preferred banks and say, would you lend to this restaurant? And very often, if I see a trend of good profits of years from a restaurant that's going to be for sale, I will put it to my preferred lender and say, would this attract an SBA loan? And if they say yes, I would advertise it as pre-approved for an SBA loan. So, and even still, when there's an SBA loan, sometimes there still isn't quite enough skin in the game from the buyer. So the buyer's got to come out with a little bit more money where he had hoped to get 85% or 90% from the bank. He might, because of his credit or his lack of experience, or he doesn't own a home, he might only be able to get 75 or 70% loan on the deal. So that every deal's different. Whatever the most unique, I don't think there's any two deals that are ever the same in 16 years I've been doing this.
Yes. Okay, next question, and I think Lorena has asked this question. Lorena, I think what we'll do is I'll get back to you. We have your email information because it's we don't have enough time to cover it. She wants to know what type of information do you consider critical to include in an LOI. An LOI is a letter of intent. Sometimes it's used as a prerequisite before we do a purchase contract, and it's usually non-binding. And it usually outlines the basic terms of the deal, the price, the terms, et cetera. But in order to really give you a thorough overview of that, unfortunately, I don't have enough time to do that, and I will get back to you on that. Next question, we have just a couple minutes, so we'll just unfortunately not have time to answer all the questions. Any question that we cannot answer that has been made, either Keith and I will get back to you shortly after this presentation today. So we appreciate your questions very much. Next question, is it difficult to do the conversion of an existing concept to a totally new concept when buying an existing restaurant? You want to take a crack on that?
Conversion of existing concept. Conversion to a totally no, because when you're buying a restaurant, you've got the bones, and then you've got 85% of what you need in a restaurant. You might want to change the furniture, chairs and tables. You might want a red wall instead of a blue wall. You might want pictures of your mum instead of pictures of somebody else. But at the end of the day, no, the conversion is not a lot. Signage, you've got to deal with the landlord to check the signage is okay size-wise, and maybe the city or county permit as far as, again, size-wise and what can be backlit and the style you want. But other than that, to change a concept of an existing restaurant is much easier, much cheaper than converting a shell site into your concept, without doubt.
Yeah, for sure. No question. Anyway, unfortunately, we've run out of time. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. And hopefully you enjoyed the show. It's certainly been Keith and my pleasure to participate. And again, if you would like to get in touch with either Keith or I, Keith's email address is keith@restaurantrealty.com. And my email address is steve@restaurantrealty.com. Our next Deal Maker Show will be February 24th at 11:30. And my special guest and co-host will be Patrick Totah, one of our top agents. And again, thanks again for joining us today. Stay well, and we'll look forward to talking to you or hopefully seeing you on Zoom again in the near future.